Welcome back to Learn Python for Economic Computation. Today we're going to go through escape sequences and finish off with the remaining string methods in this chapter. And then after that we're going to be going through working with some numbers, some basic entry for understanding how to work with values in Python. So what are escape sequences? If you're looking in the chapter, you can see escape sequences begin with a backslash and then are followed by something. And I'm going to point out a few here that'll be useful to us. Escape sequences working with quotation marks, single quotes and double quotes, and escape sequences working with backslash n, backslash t. Okay. So let's see what they do. So an escape sequence is something that tells the computer that it should not read the following text as normal. Right? Maybe if within a string, which is what we're going to look at now, it's identifying that the next letter is actually not just a string to read, but a command to the program. Okay. And so let's start out looking at how we can use an escape sequence with single quotes. So let's write out the first line. We may use single quotes with let's make sure we get that right. Single quotes and then follow with that with single quotes or in single quotes. Okay. Looks like you can erase that. Okay. Now let's see how this turns out, and then let's sort of change some things to see how it works. Okay. So we may use single quotes and single quotes. It prints out single quotes. Well, why did we use these backslashes here? Well, let's take a look what happens if we remove the backslashes. Okay, and now this is a problem because you opened a quote with a single quote, you closed the quote with a single quote, and then there's this sort of unidentified text here, not referring to anything in particular, single and quotes. Okay, if I tried to run that, the computer is going to tell me I get a syntax error. Okay, and that's because this backslash is telling it don't close the quote, just read the string as a string in this case. Read the single quote as a single quote. Okay, I'll try running it again. Well, run into the same problem, and this time it's because we still have this sort of hanging, these hanging characters over here. So I got to put the backslash before the single quote, run it, and this is what we get. Okay, so let's run through some more examples and think about this. What if we wanted to use a single quote and double quotes? And here I'm going to deviate slightly from the text. All right, and I might say we may use single quotes in double quotes. Okay, let's run that. And you can see here, oh, let's print it as well. We may use single quotes and double quotes, and this is the result that we get. So notice I didn't have to use a backslash here. No escape sequence required to use single quotes and double quotes. Only if you're using single quotes and single quotes, because to close the double quote, we just need another double quote. Right? To close the single quote, if we put another single quote, then we have to tell the computer not to close. Right? And it'll work inversely too. If you use double quotes and single quotes, you're going to get a similar result. But let's change this back to what's in the example. Let's use double quotes now. We may use double quotes and double quotes, and this time we're going to get a similar outcome here. Yeah. Now let's run through the other examples. They're pretty straightforward. What if we wanted to actually read a backslash, okay? So first let's see what happens if we just enter a backslash in here. So in the example, say we may use two backslashes to print a single backslash. Okay, and let's start out, instead of using two backslashes, let's just use one backslash. Okay, just to see what happens. And then let's print it. And what happens is that the quote doesn't close because you're using a backslash, but you're using it before a double quote. And so now you get this result where it says, well, don't read the double quote as a command to close the string. Read the double quote as a double quote that is a string. All right, well, then you don't finish the function. You don't finish the string. So here, all right, I could close that with another string, and you can see what will happen. I have just a quote there, no backslash. Okay, that's not very interesting. Now let's put 2 backslashes and see what happens. And this is what the example in the book says. And you can see here it reads it as 1 backslash. Okay, let's continue with 2 more examples. We're going to make lines, and I'm going to print this out just with spaces. Okay. Now, of course, this isn't going to do what the book says, but let's just kind of get an idea. Okay, every word is a new line. Well, you didn't really create new lines here, and if you see the example in the book, that's what it should have done. So what we could do is replace every space with \n, and we get this outcome. And you can see here, every word actually is a new line. All right, what if we wanted to use, make this a little bit easier on ourselves? So I'm going to undo all that. And instead, let's create lines, and let's say, well, lines is lines, but we're going to replace every space with a new line, with \n. Okay? And you're going to get the same outcome as before, but with a different command. And one that's quite a bit easier, right? Right, if it's a new line, if you had to put \n every time, it's a bit tedious and a little hard to read, but you know what you're getting here, and then you know what the transformation is in the next line. Okay. All right, and we have one more line to go through. New line and tab. This is straightforward. We may start a new line, or we're going to use that \n. Make a tab as well. Okay, let's run it. Oh, let's see what happened here. Oh, I put 2 equals. That's not good. There we go. All right, it ran. Now we need to print it. Print. And what do you see? Well, when we said \n, it gave us a new line. We followed that with a command for a tab, and it gave us a hanging indent. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward. Tabs can be useful. Notice if I switched over here, I could put \t instead. And let's run it and see what happens. So this is on lines. I changed it to \t instead of \n, just to see. And you can see here, instead of new line every time, we got more spaces, because that's what a tab does. Of course, that wasn't the intent. We can replace that t with n, but it's, again, useful to see how the code works. Okay. So that's it for escape sequences. We're going to create one more new file. Okay, and we're going to call this, if you look in the book, more string functions. In this case, I'm going to go through a few of the examples very quickly. And in this case, we're going to be looking at the .strip functions that basically remove spacing. Okay? So this is useful depending on what you're dealing with. I find a lot of times when I am working through column names that it's useful to replace all spaces to the left and the right of text with nothing, and that's what this will do. It can also be useful to replace all double spaces with single spaces, because sometimes there's typos. Sometimes somebody will enter a column name and it'll have double space when you should have single space, and that can create unnecessary difficulties for you. Okay, and you'll see more about that as we move through the class. But let's work through here in the document called spaces, and we're going to create an object with spaces. Look at all the spaces in the text. Okay. So you see here there's space to the left and space to the right. And let's just print the spaces with no spaces removed. Okay. Spaces. And I'm going to do this a little bit different in the book. I'm going to identify the comma as meaning a new line instead of manually entering the new line. Okay. But let's see how that works out. My system's telling me it's not happy with that choice. Oh, and this is why. I used that. I should have said, no, that should have worked. Space, there we go. Okay. Let's run it, and you can see there's spaces to the left and spaces to the right. Okay. So let's create some new variables that remove these spaces. And it looks like, well, actually, should have named this spaces. There we go. So let's name that spaces. Let's be consistent with the textbook. Okay. So remove left spaces is spaces strip. Remove right spaces equals spaces dot rstrip. Remove all left and right spaces, not all spaces. Okay. And so we can print each of these. Print remove left spaces. Print remove right spaces. And print remove left and right spaces. Let's see what turns out. And there we go. You can see here. One thing you might have noticed was that I decided instead of copy and pasting to just type out the whole thing. That can be a really good practice as you're going through to just get used to typing and looking at the screen. It'll make your life a lot easier in the long run if you type everything out in this class. You can even intend on not typing everything out after the class, but just make a commitment now. And if it's not that difficult to type out, you should type out the whole thing. A lot of times it's useful to make variables that the name is long because it's descriptive. This is one of these cases. And you might want to get used to just typing that out. Yeah. So let's also look at this and use replace, and let's compare how replace works, okay, with the strip function. So we're going to remove all spaces, and this is going to be spaces dot replace space with nothing. So double quotes with nothing, that's just an empty string. Okay. And if we print that out, we're going to see and notice in the console down here to the right, we get that there's no spaces now in the text. So that could be useful. I've had times where that's useful. Okay. Let's play with this a little bit. What if instead of removing all spaces, we said, well, let's make it a title. Let's capitalize every first word, and then see what happens. Okay. And then replace with space all the spaces with nothing. So here, this actually made it more readable. I said, well, let's make it a title. That's this chunk here. I capitalized every first letter, and then I said, now let's get rid of the spaces. This could be really useful when you're saving a file name, because sometimes we have to get rid of all the spaces. We want to make it legible, understandable when you read it, and this is a good way to do that. Okay. This extra piece was not in the book, but let's leave it here because I think it's interesting. Okay, finally, we also have triple quotes. Okay. This is really straightforward, so I won't take long with this. When you have triple quotes, everything that follows the triple quote and I want to think about this in light of the earlier example. Okay. And also want to think about how this is being interpreted in Python. So if I call this X, let's call this something else. Let's call this triple quote, just to be clear. And let's print out triple quote. And you can see here, everything printed exactly as is. When I pressed, notice that if I would have read it like this, I lost a space here. So when I pressed enter, it recorded a space. If I wanted to not record that space, if I use the backslash, then it would enter as we see in the textbook. Okay, so again, let's try that without the backslash. See, it has the space here. With the backslash, it doesn't have the space. Okay, this is a bit separate from the other examples where we were having these commands, but it does fit if you think about the escape function. We hadn't learned about escape blank, right? A backslash allows you to press enter without creating a bunch of space. It allows you to press enter so that it continues reading as though it's on the same line. That's basically what happened, and this is true whether that's in a string or outside of a string. Okay. All right, so that's it for this lesson. We've learned quite a bit about strings. This time around, we have a bit further to go in the chapter working with values, and then we'll be on to chapter 2.